Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the second workshop in the strategic planning process for the universities at Shady Grove. Today's workshop is going to focus on innovation, and it's going to be very exciting. I'll introduce our lead innovators in just a moment. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping and some brief introductions first. First, I want to welcome the students who are going to be supporting our breakouts. They're going to be taking notes for us and kind of guiding some of the Jamboard work. That's Joe Weaver and Ivana Samuels and Sario Brookins and Isley Del Rosario. So thank you to those students who are helping to support this process today. It's great to have you here, and we hope we hear your voice throughout today as well on your participation. I also want to thank some members of our strategic planning committee who are going to be doing some of the facilitation in the breakout rooms. That's Shirley Brandman, Adam Binley, Diane Alonso, Candace Caraco, Tatiana Bezbabna, Rose Jackson Spicer, and Aaron Ward. So thanks very much to our committee members who are going to be facilitating today. So we're going to start off today, as we have in previous sessions, with a mission moment, an opportunity to hear from a member of our broad USG community about the importance today of innovation. I'd like to introduce Chris Austin, who's a recent member of the USG Board of Advisors, but I will say a forever member of the USG community. He spent 2 decades at NIH, including 10 years as the founding director of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, where I would say he was disruptor in chief, bringing about all kinds of transformative work in NIH to bring amazing medical inventions to market and for use. And now he is currently, as he noted, he's moving today to Boston. He's leaving to be the CEO and partner at Flagship Pioneering. With that, Chris, welcome, and we look forward to hearing your mission moment.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ann. And you know, when Ann and Mary asked me to do this, you know, my first thought was, "You've got to be kidding!" You know, the moving van is at our house. You know, at any moment the movers could come in here, pick me up in my chair, and move me into the moving van. But I decided that that disruption was not enough to interrupt another really even more important hope for disruption, and that is at USG. And and the term disruptive innovation is a Clayton Christensen term. A lot of you probably know, and it for people who don't understand it, one could say, well, you know, disruption is a bad thing, not a good thing, and of course it can be. But what we're talking about in this context, and I think what is a very, very special mission and capability of USG, is the ability to enable a future which can be very unlike the present or the past that we are all familiar with. And how I think about disruption, and how I know USG thinks about disruption, is to say, well, gosh, if you're happy with the current state of affairs, and you're getting the outcomes you want, then for heaven's sake, don't fix what ain't broke. But if one looks around and one says, well, in 2021, do we have in Montgomery County or the state of Maryland an educational model which is fit for 2021, post-COVID, but even before that? Secondly, do we have inclusion of the populations who have traditionally been underrepresented in the work that we all do? How are we doing there? Are we doing good with regard to inclusion of those populations in a true sense? How about you know, biotech innovation, my own area of innovation? How are we doing in Montgomery County? Well, we're doing okay. Are we where we'd like to be? No. Well, what about economic growth? Are we where we want to be? Are we happy? Things doing well? I would say no. Um, how are we doing with being a truly interconnected team-based community, not only through the University of Maryland system, but with the other aspects of the public sector and the private sector? Or do we have an ideal circumstance there, or even close in any of things I just mentioned? And I would offer to you that respectfully and lovingly, that the answer to all of those challenges is we are not where we want to be. And it's not even clear to me or anybody else that we're on the right path. So in that case, I think we have the not only the organizational imperative, but the moral imperative, frankly, to have the courage to disrupt the current system in a way that brings in partners, in that charts a path for each of these things that we all know can happen. But it isn't going to happen if we keep doing the same old, same old. I think we're all aware of that. And having done this for the last 20 years at NIH, and then before that another in the private sector, and now at Flagship, what's really clear is that the articulation of a captivating vision and an inclusive vision, it is remarkably powerful in its own right. Because there are a lot of people out there who realize that in the areas that we work in, things can be better. They should be better. But there aren't the people out there saying, this is the way to get there. USG, I have put an enormous amount of my time in over the last 20 years. I was on the board during the Stu era, and then in the Ann era again. I think USG has a unique place, and I use that word carefully, a unique place at building the world we want in terms of educational models, diversity and inclusion, economic growth, a network team kind of attitude within the county and the state for education and tech, biotech, and an economic growth. And because I think that, I have insisted to Anne and Mary that though I will no longer be in the state of Maryland physically, I will be in the state of Maryland spiritually, and that anything I can do to help advise or help with partnerships, I'm really eager to do, because I collaborate with hundreds of organizations. I rarely, if ever, come across an organization like USG, and so I would urge you to think big, act big, be inclusive, but that disruptive innovation is what we need to get us to the world we all want. So thank you for having me here. I may have to mute myself, or if I get carried off to my chair in the moving van, I may have to sign off. But thank you so much. It's great to see you all.
Chris, thank you so much. That was an awesome opening for this workshop, and you laid the groundwork so beautifully for why this is such an important part of our strategic planning process. Think boldly and think big. So thank you so much, Chris, especially with so much happening in your life right now. We really appreciate you taking the time. Well, before I introduce our guests, MJ and Rick, and I'll give a formal introduction to them in a moment, they've asked me to set a little bit of the stage. Chris has already done a great job of that. So I'm going to get a little bit more specific, and that is just to put USG in the context for this innovation discussion. So as you all know, USG is an RHEC, a regional higher education center in the University System of Maryland. And we partner with 9 universities who deliver 81 academic programs that lead to high demand jobs for students in the county and the region, right? Our mission highlights strong equity lens, that all students should have an opportunity for a great education, get the support they need, graduate and find great career paths going forward. And it has an economic development lens for meeting the emergent demands for workforce and economic development in the county. And I'd say today, and over the last, I'm sorry, today we do that by, first of all, providing space and support for our partners who individually invest deeply in the planning and approval of degree programs that are rolled out at USG. And we also provide significant wraparound support services for students who are enrolled in our partner university programs. We've been very successful in doing that, but I would say that our strategic planning process is now forging the framework for delivering on this mission into the future in a bigger way. And Chris has laid that out for us, a bolder way, a better way, meeting the demand even more so for high demand jobs, and meeting the equity mission in a much bigger way. And really importantly, doing it in a sustainable way, figuring out a fiscal model and a way to fund the work that we do across the lifelong learning pathway in a way that is sustainable, that we can do this holistically and with our partners in USM and our partners in Montgomery County as well, Montgomery College and MCPS as well. So I want to focus today on one aspect of that effort. How do we do this better? How do we bring more value to this? How do we help the University System of Maryland be even more innovative, a cutting edge leader in higher education, in all of education, and our partners as well. So I want to focus briefly on this idea of USG as an innovation hub, the educational model for 2021. What is it? How do we discover it? We've got a lot of work to do to figure that out. Let's think about how USG can be a hub for some of that work, how we can support that. And there's a couple of pieces to that. So one is, how can our culture be a culture of innovation here at USG? A place where the entrepreneurial mindset thrives. So part of that is building an entrepreneurial, disruptive, innovative culture here. And our students being the heartbeat of that, right? Our students bringing the questions and the curiosity and some of the problem solving. Our staff, our partners, everyone being part of that culture. Another aspect to being an innovation hub is creating what I would call a layered educational experience. Some place where the porousness of USG thrives, right? Our close connectivity to our academic partners and our close connectivity to Montgomery County and the communities around us, so that every day there is direct learning taking place, maybe from kids from Montgomery County Public Schools coming to the Kid Museum, learning hands-on learning in the STEM programming, and with students who are maybe doing experiential learning by teaching in that space, by working with the Kid Museum and learning about STEM education and makerspace learning as part of their own educational, experiential, professional development. And also let's add in research by our academic partners, studying that approach to learning, studying the impact of that on kids' lives and on students' lives. So let's think about a layered educational experience that we can create here that is full of innovation and that generates the possibilities of that porous educational space. Another aspect of innovation is creating a place where our partners can incubate and support new programming. Our partners currently take on tremendous risk and tremendous investment to build a program, to get it approved, to hire the faculty and everyone needed to deliver on it. They get support from USG, certainly, but our partners have to bear a large burden of that. And then they have to deliver a program full blown to USG. And it's more than hope, but we hope that it succeeds, right? So it's a lot of burden on our partners. Can we reduce the risk and time for new programming? Is there a way we can incubate new ideas and foster collaboration to be more supportive of that innovative effort on the part of our partners? And finally, an innovative hub means that we have to be super innovative about delivering education more equitably and finding sustainable financial solutions for the work that we're doing and for the students who are paying for their education as well. So I just want to mention those areas as components that we might think of when we think of an innovation hub and what that might look like. USG is part of the University System of Maryland and Montgomery College and Montgomery County's effort to bring more programming, more talent development and research development to the life sciences. And I think that's a great opportunity for us to try to develop and test out some of this innovation work. With that stage setting, I'm going to introduce our amazing innovation fellows today, our guests for the workshop today. Rick Stasloff is the founder and senior partner of RPK Group, and MJ Bishop is the Associate Vice Chancellor and Director of the Kirwan Center for Academic Innovation. Rick and MJ, it is such an honor and pleasure to have you both here today. We're really excited to learn. Take it away.
Thank you, Anne. Wow, so really excited to be here and looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you for that, setting that framing, Anne, and also Chris. I think that's a tremendous way to kick things off here. So let me share my slides, and I just put a note in the chat. We are going to be conducting some interactive polls today. So while Rick and I sort of set things up here to get us started, you might want to pull out your phone and go to menti.com and enter the code that I put in the chat. It'll be on the slide here as soon as I get that. I can't talk and do this at the same time. So there we go. Hopefully you're seeing my slides now. Yeah, so we're going to do a couple of interactive polls today. So if you are interested in participating, go to menti.com and enter 49126513, and this will be on some of our other slides as well. But as Anne said, I'm MJ Bishop. I am at the University System of Maryland in the system office and have been leading the Kirwan Center for Academic Innovation for the last 8 years. Where we are essentially charged with supporting academic innovation work across the system. We've been involved in a variety of initiatives, including open educational resources, digital badging, adaptive learning tools, looking at a variety of different technologies and the intersection of that with the ways in which we think about how to increase access, affordability, and achievement for our students. So it seems only natural, and Mary Lang has been a part of the Academic Transformation Advisory Council that the Kirwan Center convenes for years. And Mary and I have had repeated conversations about the vision that both Anne and Chris just laid out about the ways in which Shady Grove could be an innovation hub and something that we have both been very interested in pursuing. I've known Rick almost as long as the time that I've been at the Kirwan Center. He was introduced to me by a fellow at the time who was at the Gates Foundation, who she said to me, if you're doing innovation work, you need to be talking about the other side of this equation as well. And Rick Stasloff is your guy. He's the one that can help you think about the financial aspect and the financial models for this kind of innovation. Rick, do you want to say a couple more words about your background?
Thanks, MJ, and thank all of you for coming together for the great work you are doing. I'm Rick Stasloff, founder, senior partner with RPK. Short version, I spent 22 years as a CFO in higher ed, 2-year, 4-year, public, private. Got to see higher ed from a lot of different perspectives. And we've been having fun with finance at RPK for 10 plus years now, thinking about the business model and how it helps to create sustainable innovation, how it supports all great innovation work around student success and mission. So looking forward to exploring that further with you today.
Great, thanks, Rick. So the plan for today, we've decided we're going to do the why, the what, the who, the how. We left the ugly out. We can talk about that some other time, but at least for the time being, cover kind of the 3 W's and the H of innovation. So, really looking at the ways in which the answers to these questions around what is the urgency, what should our responses be, what is the role of USG, and what is a sustainable business model for transforming higher education, what should that look like, and how might USG be re-envisioned to become that innovation hub that Anne spoke about. But before we dig in, I'm going to really challenge the technology gods here, and we're going to try to do this Mentimeter poll. So we'd like to know a little bit more about you. Again, to participate, if you have your phone out, you can go to www.menti.com. You can also, of course, do this in the web browser on the device that you're staring at the moment. Just make sure that you don't lose track of your Zoom window, because we'll be showing the results of the polls through these slides that you're about to see. So we're going to start out, if you've managed to get in there, we're going to start out with a slow pitch question. Would you rather speak all languages or speak to animals? This is your chance to test out the tools before we get into the serious stuff. Oh, so far, speak all languages. If you're like me, you're probably not really interested in understanding more about what your dog's thinking. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. Who, by the way, I'm quite sure will come in at some point during this whole conversation. He's likely to be holding a green football in his mouth, so don't be alarmed. All right, Rick, looks like we're overwhelmingly looking to speak all languages. A couple more folks weighing in on the speaking to animals.
Yeah, I think the Dr. Doodle crowd has lost out here today.
It seems to be the case. Or maybe the people that want to speak to animals are a little slower with the technology. That could be another piece to this.
Or they're trying to get their dog to come over and answer the question.
Right, exactly.
The dog doesn't understand.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you for your responses to that. I'm going to go ahead to the next question. Hopefully you are now seeing a prompt to answer the question, what did you come for today? So is it your interest in the future of Shady Grove, to learn more about innovation in higher ed? Are you looking to better understand USG's role within the system? You can't get enough of Zoom meetings. I'm waiting for at least one person to answer that. Or is there something else that you came for today? I think Chris is in there going over, repeating, interest in the future of USG, interest in the future of USG. I'm there in spirit, I'm there in spirit. All right. Nobody wants more Zoom meetings. All right, well, for sure that wasn't a good option to throw up there. All right, next question. What is your role in relation to USG? So are you a student, a faculty member, administrator, community member? This is going to be you're going to have to actually type on this one. I think this is an open-ended question. Staff. Consultant. And the cool thing about this is that the word cloud, obviously, the more staff who answer staff, the bigger the word staff will get. Partner institution, yeah. Student council, great. Several folks from the board, which is terrific. All of whom, or many of whom, are interested in the future of USG and want to speak all languages. So now we're getting to know a little bit about all of you. All right. Okay, so these questions are getting a little more complicated as we go along. The fourth one in this set is, as you think about higher education today, as say compared to 15 years ago or so, what are some of the pressures you're aware of that higher education faces? Enrollment cliff, Changing value proposition. Yes. Funding, financial costs. I'm glad I invited you here today, Rick. Tuition, changing demographics, affordability, access. I think this will scroll up, maybe not. Let me, this is something I probably should have tested, doggone it. Nope.
Maybe the arrows, MJ.
I think that takes us to the next
Oh.
question. Wait a minute, let me see here. Oh, shoot. Sorry about that. I knew something would blow up here. Yeah, that's not it either. Okay,
Down in
well,
the corner with the people counter.
yeah,
Is there anything?
nothing there. No. Toggle results. I'm gonna try one more thing since I know you're still answering. All right, well, sorry about that, but we will, obviously, this is still catching those results, capturing those responses. So we'll make sure that your responses become part of the information that we share back with everybody at USG. Sorry about that. For sure, we got an awful lot about funding and costs at the beginning here, though, Rick.
Good. We're in the right place then.
Absolutely. All right. So with that information, we will begin by, as we said, for our plan for the day, with the why. And this is actually a modification, this concentric circles of Simon Sinek's golden circle from his book, Start With Why, that many of you may be familiar with, in which he suggested that in order to inspire everyone to take action, you really have to begin by starting to ask and answer the question, why? For higher education, I think as we're talking about innovation and transformation, the why is about understanding the urgency for change. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about that here in the next few slides. So I shared this with Rick. He really thought I ought to share this with the group. It was somewhere around the summer or fall of 2000 even, after I had successfully defended my dissertation in May and gotten my first tenure track job. I was at Lehigh University at the time. My father pulled me aside and said, I am so glad you're in higher education because you don't see colleges going out of business, which, is something that was true at the time, or at least seemed true at the time. It was a rare event when we heard about a college going out of business. But increasingly, if you're reading Inside Higher Ed, in fact, just today, there was news about a Roman Catholic college in Florida merging with a Roman Catholic college in California. These stories are becoming increasingly part of the news. And in fact, even before the pandemic, Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School was predicting that half of American colleges would be bankrupt within 10 to 15 years. And other more recent dire predictions estimate that as many as 20% of America's private liberal arts colleges, which is roughly around 200 institutions, will close over the next few years. So, some of these predictions are debatable, but it is clear, and the fact is that 69 colleges and universities have closed or merged with other institutions since 2016. And even many more who were struggling before the pandemic, the decline has accelerated, unfortunately. So just what are the contributing factors to this decline? And I know many of you are painfully aware of these gravitational forces at play, but to make sure that we're sort of all working here off the same playbook, these gravitational forces include things like internal pressures, market trends, environmental impacts, all of which I think need to factor into our future approach and the way we're thinking about things. This is actually a slide that Deloitte presented to the Board of Regents, I think probably last fall sometime in a conversation about the future of higher ed. The internal pressures that are depicted here, and they impact all of our campuses across the USM, can largely be characterized as the extent to which they're being asked to do more with less. Budget cuts over the last 12 years that started in 2008 with the financial meltdown of the recession that year. And now, of course, with COVID and its aftermath, have created funding shortfalls and altered campus revenue streams, which is shifting higher education from what some economists have perceived as a public good to being much more of a private good. The burden is much more increasingly on the students themselves to cover the tuition and the cost of education. At the same time, while these budget cuts are occurring, the institutions are also faced with the fact that as many as 1 in 5 students who are now coming to us for post-secondary education are quitting before they finish. And that most of those who leave, as we all know, are unfortunately among the most economically disadvantaged. So how do we support those students toward success when we have fewer resources to bring to bear on the problem? Similarly, market trends, workforce disruption, the things that are happening and the extent to which computers are taking over jobs is being likened to the massive shifts that occurred during the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries, and then the information age that followed in the last century. As a result, we're seeing increasingly alternative providers and other means of education providing boot camps, alternative credentials, in-house training that's happening in corporations and so forth in order to ensure that their employees have the skills they need in order to be able to continue in their jobs. Environmental impacts, these are all well known to us as well, all of which are sort of resulting in fewer students coming to us. Somebody mentioned the enrollment cliff, demographic shifts. The students that are coming to us are changing dramatically. The non-traditional student is becoming the new normal, what used to be called non-traditional. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. Of course, none of us really know what the impacts of COVID-19 are going to have on us long-term in terms of our fiscal and financial sustainability. And of course, as graduates leave our campuses and are unable to find jobs, there'll continue to be questions about the value of the 4-year degree and attitudes towards increasingly bad attitudes toward higher education. So how's all this playing out on our campuses? As part of the Board of Regents Enrollment Work Group, we have been engaging senior leaders in a series of questions using a surveying technique called the Delphi method, which asks us experts a big open-ended question like, what challenges are you facing in reaching your enrollment goals? And gradually builds consensus towards the answers. And I won't get into detail on the methodology, but analysis of our responses that we received from the presidents, the provosts, vice presidents for student affairs, CFOs, CIOs, and also the enrollment management vice presidents yielded 8 gaps that they believe will need to be addressed in order to optimize our existing higher ed markets and begin exploring new areas for growth moving forward. So they said things like, we need to be more relevant. We need to develop programs and credentials that are meaningful to the learners that come to us and that result in the kinds of skills and attitudes and aptitudes that employers are seeking. We need to be more equitable. We need to take a hard look at the ways in which the infrastructure that we have is creating structural racism and barriers to higher education that are unintended, but very real nevertheless. We need to be more student-centered. We need we're hearing things like maybe we need to think about our definition of what is student success. Does it need to equal a degree for every single learner that comes to us? How do we think about the ways in which we fill the needs individually for the students that come to us instead of taking the one-size-fits-all approach that we do now? We need to be more outcomes focused. We need to understand not just what our learners were taught, which is basically what we put on a transcript, but rather what they really know and are able to do when they graduate. And how do we present that to external stakeholders like employers, and quite frankly, also to the students themselves so they understand where they fit within the range of the skills that they need. One big thing that came through very much so with the senior leaders was the extent to which they felt they were going to need to be freer to innovate. They need that safe space in order to be able to do this work and to think about what these things need to look like moving forward. Those innovations need to be data-based, and we need to be sure that we use those opportunities to continuously improve and think about the ways in which we can iteratively make changes to the ways in which we currently do things. Better prepared is about making sure that our staff, faculty, and everybody that is going to have to engage in these new changes is prepared to do so. Have they had the professional development they need? Do we have the right players, the right people in the seats in the bus, kind of an idea about how we move forward? And of course, we need to be well resourced, which, as you can imagine, and as came through in your responses, is a huge concern as we face the budget cuts and are trying to do more with less, as I mentioned. But interestingly, the responses weren't just about convincing the state legislature to invest in us more. They were also about thinking about how we do better within our own financial systems and the ways in which we're allocating resources internally to make sure that we're prioritizing the things that we need to be prioritizing. So are we prepared to say that traditional higher education is a thing of the past? This is something too that we hear an awful lot. And certainly we're seeing that institutions are faltering financially, and post-COVID that our students are going to be expecting a whole new level of technology use and flexibility around delivery modes, both for instruction as well as for academic services. But I guess the extent to which this is true, or is a statement that's true, depends on how you define higher education. And I wanted to share another slide with you that we also saw from Deloitte that takes a big look at the US education market segments. So out of the $1.4 trillion US education market, K-12 is the gray part of the circle. The parts of the circle that are in colors are or yellow, purple, and red are higher education or non-K-12 is the best way to put it. As you can see here, traditional higher education still makes up a huge portion of this pie, $580 billion in the nonprofit space, which is where we live. And this is defined as those both nonprofit and for-profit private universities and colleges that are offering academic courses and grant bachelor's, graduate, and doctoral degrees, and we would add and certificates because that's also a big portion of what we do as well. So the yellow part of this pie is huge, but as you can see, the CAGR, the extent to which this segment of the market is growing is very small, 0.5%. Whereas some of the other segments like corporate learning and development, so this is the whole space where corporations are looking to upskill, reskill employees, and the MOOCs and OPMs, which is the massive open online course providers, strategies for learning and credentialing at scale, is growing even faster at 15%. And quite frankly, this slide is a little dated. It would be interesting to see this updated now that we have the recent IPO for Coursera, which is in this space, and also the 2U and edX merger that was announced a couple of weeks ago. So even though traditional, even though the yellow part of this isn't growing very quickly, I think one of the things that we have been coming away with as we think about the larger discussions around enrollment and strategic planning process for the system is that we need to get a lot better at exploiting the yellow part of this pie. We need to be thinking hard about how we make sure that we do better within the traditional higher education market and keep a foot somewhat firmly planted there, while at the same time beginning to invest smartly in the other parts of this grid, the corporate learning and development and learning and credentialing at scale. So the one thing I haven't talked about so far is that looming enrollment cliff, which was brought up in the responses to the last question. And as we've seen in all the numbers, experts anticipate up to 15% drop in freshman prospects beginning in 2025 due to the decline in birth rate that began actually also with the 2008 recession and has lasted for many years after it. But the reality here is that the 18-year-old fresh from high school college student, those traditional college students, as we've called them in the past, aren't really our primary customers anymore, as I was mentioning earlier. In fact, 37% of college students are 25 or older, 46% are first-generation college goers, 64% of college students are working, while of them, 40% are working full-time and supporting themselves through school. And I'm going to put another link in the chat here to a page on Illumina Foundation website that actually, if you're not really, if it's been a while since you've thought about what college students look like, they do a really nice job in the infographic. It's interactive, really painting the picture of who our students are today nationally. So today's students are vastly different than they were decades ago, but colleges are still structured, quite frankly, as if 18 to 20-year-olds full-time students are in the majority. And that's something that we've noted that really needs to change. While some colleges and universities have begun to improve, really they haven't begun to think hard yet, many of them, about who are our customers, or they're just beginning to think hard about this. And here's a graphic that I put together to try to sort of depict this. That traditional degrees, and these aren't mathematically correct, by the way, this is just a listing, although the balance suggests that somehow I've weighted these in a way that is scientific, which it's not. But as we think about our customers, I think we've got a whole segment of individuals that come to us or are going to begin coming to us increasingly. And we're actually really well situated to address their needs. We market to individuals. They apply as individuals, they're enrolled as individuals, and those people include traditional degree seeking, but increasingly adult degree seeking. And also, I think increasingly we're going to see folks coming to us that aren't looking for degrees. They're looking for smaller credentials. They're unemployed or they're employed, but they want to upskill and reskill. And then there's this other whole segment of potential customers that I've characterized as corporate on this slide, which doesn't just mean employers, it could also mean governments and school districts, but these are people coming to us looking for more bulk purchases, if you will. They're looking to take a cohort of people within their organizations and provide them with education that they need in order to continue in their jobs or to be reskilled to the extent that they need to be. And interestingly, we don't have much of anything in place to deal with that side of this balance. And there's another whole huge potential market that is going untapped, or is only being tapped in a very limited way, that I think is going to be important moving forward. All this is leading towards this concept of lifelong learners. These are the folks that experts argue, this is where things are moving going forward. That level of post-secondary preparation that has worked in the past, where I go to school for 4 years, I'm deemed fully baked, you send me on my way and I'm good for life, is no longer going to be the case. That we're going to increasingly see people who need to be consuming just-in-time education in short spurts rather than lengthy blocks of time, because they're working full-time. And they're going to be seeking stackable credentials that make sense and that they can put together into telling a story about who they are and what they know and are able to do. So how do we better serve these students and also reach the millions of former students who have completed some work toward a degree, but without the diploma, they have nothing of substance to mark their learning accomplishments? So I'm going to turn this back to you all. Hopefully you haven't lost your Menti link, and ask you this question. What are some opportunities higher education has available to respond to the challenges and address future demand for post-secondary education? So once again, this is, I'll put the information, oops, sorry. I know I just toggled back. I didn't mean to do that. I'll put the information in the chat for you. And go to the next question, which I haven't done yet. This one is set up to scroll, so hopefully we won't have any problems with this one. Certificate offerings, boot camps, micro-credentialing, easy on and off ramps. Yes, one of my favorite analogies. I think I pulled the slide out that has the graphic of the LA freeway and all the on and off ramps. Certifications, partnerships with employers, be customer centric. It's one of the big things that came up in the discussions with the senior leaders about the need, particularly for our administrative systems, to be a lot more like Amazon and to be a lot more responsive to student requests. Diversifying instruction, short-term training, true lifelong learning, building practical experience into any degree program, absolutely, internships, apprenticeship opportunities even. Reduce costs, more partnerships. Expertise readily available, pathway programs. These are all great. Reaching students who feel like college isn't for them, and dealing, figuring out where the places are that we're throwing up the barriers that make them feel that way. We had a great conversation yesterday about student parents and the things that they encounter that get in the way of their ability to continue their education. Adaptive learning, academic credit for experience, think pathways, virtual reality classrooms, and more online I saw earlier. These are all great. Learner-centered teaching, yes. Terrific. Practical experiences for students. Ensuring students are prepared, addressing the needs of highly variable student populations and assisting students with disabilities. Yep, equity and access. Take an ROI approach. Somebody's setting you up, Rick. And the credit hour. Yes, thank you. All right, so it looks like I think we're just about to the end of the responses. Rick, shall I kick it over to you? Is there anything else you want to talk about here?
No, I think this provides a really good stepping off point for our next discussion, MJ, which is really around the what. So when I think about this session that you all have just participated in, to me, it speaks very strongly of urgency. Now, urgency isn't panic, right? But urgency around the need to change and our ability to change, which you all are now pointing towards in some of the responses that you've just shared with us. But even in the instances where we have that urgency, I find across higher ed that often there's a lack of will, or perhaps even a lack of understanding around the what. So where do we go from here? How should we respond? We think about this next slide, just to provide a little bit of framing here for a minute. I have to say, I've been very struck. We work with hundreds of institutions around the country, a little bit internationally. And the overwhelming response that we are hearing from senior leadership at institutions right now is, I can't wait to get back to normal, right? Fall 2021, and a desire, quite frankly, to reach back and make fall 2021 look a whole lot like fall 2019. And I think that is a very normal human response, right? To reach back to what you knew, particularly when what you knew was working, at least for some. The question is getting back to normal really the right strategy? And if it's not, what might a new normal start to look like? Now, some of the things that you all just shared with us a moment ago around opportunities, a lot of those ideas have been around for a while. And are they happening in some spaces around higher ed? To some extent. But when we think about the model today, it's a model that's been with us for a while. So let's consider for a moment then what a new normal might want to include, starting with the student, faculty, the staff experience. We've all just gone through this great experiment, right? That was forced upon us around remote work, around remote learning. to what extent at our institutions are we reaching back to see what worked and what do we want to bring forward now in terms of the ways that we make learning happen? As we think about the programs and services we offer, are we going to continue to offer the things we want to offer, the more inward look that higher ed has had for so long? Or can we now get more externally focused in terms of workforce demand, student demand, and in thinking about lifelong learning models? And finally, in thinking about the business model, how do we move, as Ann talked to us at the outset, to a more sustainable model, and one that, instead of looking at how we allocate resources, looks at how we earn resources and starts to understand return on investment and how that return on investment connects into student success and mission, combined with greater transparency and accountability. Where then do these intersection points happen between the experience program offerings and the business model? And how might we start to think about creating spaces in which we can start to create more innovation, discover best practice, and share that forward out to the system and beyond? And I think this goes back now to Chris's invitation to us at the outset of this meeting, to think about having the courage to disrupt, to have a clear shared future vision, and then that shared future vision that Ann shared with us around USG becoming that safe space in which innovation can happen, but where we can also learn about how to make innovation happen and start to share that forward in new ways across the system. So moving towards a new normal that helps us to understand what's worked over the last year and a half, particularly, but most importantly, helps us to understand that most of the challenges we've been sharing with you so far this morning are long-standing challenges that will require longer-term solutions. And how can USG serve to help us understand that? So MJ, back to you now to start to think about that role and what it could look like.
Yeah, so do we want to go to the next slide in the interest of time, Rick, or you're muted?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Gotcha. All right. So yes. So thinking about the role of USG and the extent to which perhaps USG can provide that safe space for the institutions to experiment in some of these ways. We're going to start with our first breakout. Let me switch slides here. The primary question for the breakout is, as you think about how USG could become an innovation hub for USM institutions, please address the following question. How do we design USG to create a safe space for institutional innovation? So we're going to, Jeff, I think, is going to magically whisk you into your breakout rooms. You will have a facilitator, and also they have a link they will share with you to a Jamboard that you're going to use to create a strategy per Post-it note as you're thinking about your response to this question. Once you have amassed a bunch of strategies, the second part of the discussion will be for you to think about whether the strategy that you've proposed or your colleagues have proposed is something that USG can pursue and is a strategy that exists at that level, or whether it's something that really the institutions need to pursue, but perhaps there's a way in which USG could facilitate or support or in other way make it happen. So we're going to send you out into your breakout rooms now. Jeff, we'll let you do that. And don't be alarmed when Rick and I pop in and out, because we're going to be sort of lurking to hear some of the discussion and hopefully provide some opportunity for discussion afterwards. So question is, how long is the breakout? Thank you, Candace. I failed to answer that question. I think we're going to go with 15 minutes, Rick. Yeah, okay. So 15 minutes in the breakouts.
Okay, here we go.
Thanks, Jeff. Welcome back, everyone. Let's start showing slides again here. So hopefully you all had a good conversation. We were having a good conversation in breakout one. Rick, what were some things that you were hearing
I really like the way Shirley and the group framed some of the conversation and sort of lifted it up thematically. Everyone was very engaged. One was around, how do you think about faculty being the unit of change, which could be more directly through grants to support work around innovation, professional development on innovation in terms of best practice. How do you put this in play? And then bringing that into course design, course delivery, which I know you know a thing or 10 about, MJ. As you think about students being the unit of change, some ideas around internship, connecting to the world of work, but maybe building stipends into tuition. So actually making it part of the business model instead of it being an extra that you can participate in if you want. It's actually part of how learning is happening. Similarly, making career learning part of all course offerings so that we're always connecting into the world of work and how that applies. Trying to respect the idea that all learning counts. So there was some conversation around prior learning assessment and making sure that maximizing that opportunity and bringing that back into students' pathways. So those are a couple of key things that really jumped out at me. How about in your group?
Yeah, we had several of those ideas. Also, Erin, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to come off mute and talk a little bit about your thought about the regional employers.
Sure. So I just mentioned that maybe make it a little bit easier. We've talked about this in other discussions before too, about making our model here on USG campus a little bit more of a shared space with community businesses. So, if I'm interested in an internship or an employment opportunity right here on campus in certain opportunities, and if I have to run out to a class, it's just the building next door. But have those businesses here sort of enmeshed in our environment.
Mm-hmm. And how about a couple of the other breakout room facilitators? Rick and I had hoped to be able to jump around between rooms, but we weren't able to technically. So other things that jumped out at you as key themes?
I can add, I was in a breakout session, number 6. Something that we discussed is for innovation to be sustainable in the long run, it's important for us to involve different stakeholders in that process. So it's not only innovating within the USG, but it's also involving our industry partners. It's also involving our institutional partners in what the ideas are and how they are going to be implemented. In that case, we are going to make sure that what we do, what we create is going to be demanded and it's going to be in request, right? Someone will always need it, basically.
Yep. And we talked about that a little bit too, in relation to supporting students, for example, that stop out and, don't realize they could come back and, what the supports are available to them, makes Shady Grove a model for that, but then use that as a means to work back with the institutions on sharing some of those best practices and the ways in which those successes have been realized. So that same kind of not just sustainability, but also idea of spread across across the USM. Any others who have things they would like to share?
I'm in group 7, and I came in a little after you all started the discussion, so I may be redundant with people. We certainly heard that the imperative from the student, how important this campus is, and the obviously all of the benefits with scholarships and everything. We talked a little bit about the idea of needing to, it's not always going to be safe. We have to take chances. We need to think of these as brave spaces and making attempts at things. We have TLST and things like that, but also bringing the arts into this. One thing that I think we talked a little about was the idea of really good communication lines, both within Shady Grove, being able to go across the barriers, really not, I think someone brought up the idea of not being competitive, but working truly collaboratively. I think this has come up in other conversations before, true collaboration, both within USG, but also with our home institutions. I think those lines of communication have to be very strong. And I think it's also important that the home institutions recognize Shady Grove faculty, students, and everyone as an important part of the home institution. So we're not an afterthought, we're very integrated into that part. So I think those connections being strong help.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and in group 5, a lot of our discussions really resonated with what you're talking about. And one of the things that I think really reflects on this is removing some of the barriers that make these processes, the term used was cumbersome, which I think is a good one. Getting approval for a new program, by the time a program might be approved, that industry demand is already out of Montgomery County. So, making sure that we see USG as a place where we can try new things, and that the sort of procedural barriers are removed. And, instead of having a slow process, a process that's perhaps incentivized, and really encouraging collaboration. We talked about a great program that had interdisciplinary students working together from all of the different institutions. But making programs like that work requires funding, and not just funding, but it requires different institutions to come together to agree on, a funding situation when funding is already tight. So really thinking about, how do we become a place that empowers things to move quickly, and I don't know, follow the rules of improv and say yes to things, instead of being, slow and perhaps making the process, by the time you are able to implement something successfully, you've already drained some of its momentum. So I really appreciated being a part of that discussion.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone else?
So I was in group 2, and a lot of what we were talking about, I think Adam just mentioned. We had a lot of conversations around these ideas of like mixed or unique course offerings, of sort of cross-institutional degree programs, things like this that can, again, further sort of foster this sort of collaborative spirit within USG as a whole. And then further from that, again, sort of look at USG as sort of this space for us to test things out, just throw stuff against the wall. I mean, fail often, fail quickly, and, find something that works well for students, for staff, for teachers, for sort of the institutional partners that we work with. And further from that, look at this idea of USG as sort of being this hub, this collective of these institutions, and that we could be sort of marketing USG to federal partners, to large business regional employers. I mean, we have FDA, NIH, NIST, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of ways that if we sort of, as others were mentioning, take down these sort of internal barriers, internal procedural barriers, take those down, and then we can sort of, as a almost unique entity, then go out into the world and try and ensure that students are finding careers, that employers are aware of USG, and we're able to sort of get that sort of dialectic going
Terrific.
In earnest.
Thank you for that. And it sounds like you all had great discussions. Thanks to the facilitators. And I know we didn't get to everybody, but we do have the Jamboards, and we'll be collecting the information from those as well. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Rick to tackle the how.
Thanks, MJ, and thank all of you for your creativity and innovation in the room. I liked some of the comments I heard in your groups, that right here, right now, you're actually modeling good creativity, good innovation, practice that you can bring back into the classroom, into the office, into your own work. So how do we link up now into the business model? And we started out our conversation, you remember MJ said the importance of thinking about the why question. And so let's talk about that for a moment, even around the business models. Why would we talk about the business model? On the next slide, what we tried to capture here is an idea that higher ed has been given a lot of big jobs, and you all are living this every day. How do we maintain access? We want more students to be benefiting from what we offer, while thinking about affordability to help maintain that. At the same time, we want to drive towards greater equity and ultimately get students towards a completion of their goals. That could be a full degree, a piece of learning, something related to their own quality of life. So how do we do those big jobs in a world where we have constrained resources, we have declining enrollments, et cetera? I think one of the ways we tackle that is by bringing the business model to the table, which helps us move towards not just innovation, but sustainable innovation. I think it's something we heard very strongly from Ann at the outset of our conversation. On my now 4 decades of higher ed work, I've been very struck at how historically innovation can last as long as the grant lasts, or often we innovate, but it stays stuck in a smaller part of our organization, and it doesn't get woven into the life of the institution. And so by bringing the business model to bear, it's helping us to think about this idea of linking innovation into sustainability. And that requires a few shifts. It means we have to move from our focus on spending and budget balancing more towards investment and return on investment. It means we have to understand, what does ROI mean? And also, what doesn't it mean? Ultimately, while yes, we're going to need to bring good data to bear, we're going to need new systems and new tools, it really is going to require some good change management, and it's going to require a change in culture. So let's go a little bit deeply then around some of these key concepts, and then we're going to open it up into our next breakout session. MJ, on the next slide, we get a little bit more deeply then into ROI. So remember I said earlier, what do we mean by ROI, but also what don't we mean? I've really seen 3 key concepts to keep in mind around return on investment. The first is having a more holistic understanding of resources. You all know very often when we want to go do something new, a new course, a new program, a new location, a new approach, we often want new resources to go with that. And how do we think about getting more for the resources we already have? In a lot of our work, for instance, with provosts, I think, boy, as a provost, you usually have 40 or 50% of the spending within your budget area. Instead of waiting for new resources, how do we start to shift resources? I had a great example here recently on this holistic use of resources with a project we were running looking at some new student success initiatives. I had an interview with a chief technology officer, and she said, "Rick, this is going to be your quickest interview today." I said, "Why?" She said, "Our innovation was totally free." I said, "Tell me again about your institution." She said, "Oh, we're multi-campus community college, almost 100,000 students." I said, "Okay, what did you do?" She said, "Well, we developed these MOOC-based learnings for student success around use of finances, getting ready for college, study habits, etc. Partnered up with our 4-year institution." I said, "Okay, how did you get it done?" She said, "Well, I had 6 instructional designers working on it. We had 20 faculty that each had 2 course releases. It was about 25% of my time." And I said, we got to talk about free here for a minute in higher ed. So how do we think broadly about resources, people, time, and money, and how we're putting them into play and what we get for it? It takes us to an understanding around unit costs, not just total spending, but spending to accomplish something. Simple idea, thinking about cost per completion. What does it cost to get a student to getting that final degree, and how is that changing over time? So now we're bringing efficiency and productivity into outcomes, right, and total spending. And finally, we've got to culturally overcome what can be a pushback, right, between student success and financial sustainability, and to see that by understanding how we put resources into play in the business model, really we can be supporting in the long term the things that people are most passionate about, whether it's student success or their own discipline. Drilling down a little bit farther then on the next slide in ROI, I do think we have to honor that ROI means different things for different stakeholders. So just a few examples here. If I'm a student, my ROI lens is probably more around having, if not a reduced, at least a stabilized price. And I'm thinking certainly about this other precious commodity I give to my institution, which is my time. And how do I reduce my time to degree? For an institution, probably more of a focus on the bottom line, so I have sufficient resources to reinvest, all the way up to a system, a state, and a national level around being good stewards of resources. Next slide. Final thought then, in terms of how we define business model and ROI, my observation has been that historically we have lived more on what I would call the revenue side of the equation, right? So we are asking our state and local governments for more funding. We go out and fundraise, all important. We increase financial aid to help students write what is an ever bigger check. What's the one question that we don't ask? We don't ask why higher ed costs what it costs, and what could we do about that? And what are the levers under our control? So we can think about that cost side of the equation, whether it's from an entire institutional perspective, down at a program or a course level, within specific initiatives, within specific student success ideas, so that we understand what does it cost, and more importantly, what do we get for those people time and the money that we are spending there, so that we ensure that resources are now aligned with strategy, which helps us to shift resources from things that may not be supporting student success and quality and mission towards things that have a greater ROI. And we can now adopt greater transparency and accountability, so we're holding ourselves accountable around what good looks like. A few then quick examples that maybe bring this home and make it even more tangible. Some recent work that RPK did looking at the business model behind student success. In this case, looking at bringing new technology and tools into place to support advising models. What did we find in institutions that brought those models to bear? We saw very solid shifts in student retention. And here we start to connect the dots, right? As we bring new abilities to bear that support student success, we actually find it's good for the bottom line. As students stay, they take more credits in order to drive towards their degree completion. It actually generates new net revenue for the institution. Why is that important? Remember that idea of sustainable innovation. We're not only bringing innovation in that supports student success, but it's becoming its own economic engine, right? Creating revenues that allow for reinvestment in that student success. Next slide example, we talked earlier in some of our breakout groups about prior learning assessment. How can we honor the fact that learning's happening lots of different places, not just in the classroom in that moment? As we did research recently with a Lumina-funded project to look at prior learning assessment, one of the biggest fears that was surfaced in our research and case studies was around the idea that institutions would lose money by accepting prior learning assessment credits, which really put a damper on institutions shifting towards new PLA models. Our research found that actually institutions made net revenue by bringing in the prior learning assessment credits. Students stayed, retained, took credits to the institution that exceeded the PLA credits. So it actually was good for students, good for student success, good for completion, and actually again became its own economic engine. So a few examples of how we think about linking the business model into student success, which would also apply if we were to look at academic programs and even thinking about the service side of the equation. New ways of thinking, I think, about the business model. Again, another example, if USG starts to move towards being a place in which sustainable innovation can be discovered and shared out. Just to put a bow then on that thinking around the business model, MJ, a couple key points. We've talked about ROI, and that can feel like it's just about money and numbers, but really we know that it has to touch on culture. What is that culture that we really want to start to move towards? It is, yes, around innovation. It is about entrepreneurialism, but it's also about bringing good data in to help us figure out how people, time, and money, the resources we already have, can be put to use in new ways that create financial sustainability at the same time it's creating student success. So I hope that gives you a few thoughts and some framing then as to how and why we might bring the business model to bear. Now, MJ, I think we wanted to move to our second breakout session where we let everybody start to share their thoughts around this idea about sustainable innovation.
Absolutely. So the format will be the same. You will have a Jamboard, actually the same Jamboard made available to you. You just click to go to the second page of it. And this time we want you to answer two questions. What incentives might we create that will help us move toward this shared future for USG? And what opportunities are there to reallocate existing resources? So Jeff, we'll have you move them to the breakouts. And I think probably we need to do this as a 10-minute this time, since we're coming up against 2 o'clock here. So
Okay.
we'll go ahead and send everybody off.
Okay, here we go.
All right, looks like everybody's back. Rick, what were you hearing?
Great dialogue. I really like the way people both framed the conversation around the business model ROI, but got down to some real tangible examples. So probably the most powerful ones that I heard, MJ, were around really making what I would call bigger bets, right? Like, where do we start to shift the resources we already have towards things that are most likely to have a growth opportunity, where there's greater demand, where we know we have really strong industry partners who have needs, rather than giving a little bit to lots of things, which means we have to understand what are those opportunities, where are the resources, how are they connecting or not connecting. So I thought that reallocation idea really came out very strongly. Secondly, from a sort of a scale perspective, thinking about how do we take not only the programmatic pieces, but even some of the service pieces like community events, et cetera, and just grow that, right? As long as we think that there's greater ROI to be gained. And the third, there were a number of what I would call sort of fee for service ideas around, well, we have services offering space, like how do we further maximize the value that's being created for that, both within our own offerings, but even out into the community. How about you? What did you hear?
That's great. Yeah, we started, and this is something I think that we're going to need to address. We started with a just kind of basic question about how much do we really know about what things cost to begin with in order to get to that ROI place. And I think I had quite a few folks in my breakout from the academic affairs side, and just sort of that realization that that's going to be a heavy lift, for us to get to that place where we understand where things cost in order to be able to make these decisions. But Deborah, I'm going to put you on the spot. I love calling people out. This is horrible to do to folks. I'm sorry. Deborah, do you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on, we ended up calling them apprenticeships, but your thoughts about what that might look like? Do you mind coming off mute?
Sure. So many students need to work in order to be able to go to school. And it's great to say we're going to build in other opportunities, but if you need to work, why can't we find employers who are willing to hire someone part-time so they can pursue a degree in a relevant field while they're also working for you? I think it's fine to say, okay, if we agree to do this arrangement for you while you pursue your degree, you agree to work for us 2 years post-graduation. So you make sure that there's, some, again, return on investment for the employer, but it builds the learning and the working together, so that they're not things that you're trying to balance. They're things that you've actually built in so that both sides can be successful.
That's great. Thank you, Deborah. How about a couple of the other facilitators that didn't get a chance to report out after the first breakout?
I can jump in and just share. We actually had a good conversation about some really foundational underlying questions here. One is that USG, because of our current fiscal model, is just in a more limited place in terms of when we think about reallocation. So we talked about the fact that some of what we need to do as a first step is actually make clear, make transparent the things we do that don't already have funding streams attached to them, but have real cost. So we picked up on Rick's conversation about ROI being part of the culture, thinking about the things we want to invest in, recognizing that our students come with unique needs and we serve them in different ways, but needing to make some of that very transparent, maybe like someone said before, thinking about what the real costs are, and then recognizing that we may currently be more limited in reallocation, but we have to start the conversation at understanding both those realities.
Thank you for that, Shirley. And Adam agrees. Adam, do you want to report out a little bit about what you all talked about in your breakout?
Yeah, we had a great discussion about really thinking about, in some ways going back to that concept of the flywheel and having the right people in place to do the right work. A phrase that was brought up is it's hard to be innovative when you're in survival mode. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of folks, you're getting your budget for the fall semester in October. You really don't know what your funding model is going to look like. You're relying on this wonderful sense of collaboration where you might have an institutional partner working on a grant that benefits USG and other institutions. And that leadership is really powerful and important, but is it sustainable and doesn't encourage innovation? So I think a lot of these ideas are, we talked about really finding ways to empower people to do this work, not just as, it's your 5% of your job on Saturday when you're drinking coffee in the morning and you have time to do it, but it really is part of your culture, part of your job description, and part of how you become a leader on campus. And so, we talked a lot about funding in that way, and it also came up in our group as well, dedicating funding for some of these more innovative programs directly to empower students. And that's why I think Deb's idea is really powerful, because, you're getting students while, the experience they need while they're getting their degree. So that, I think that really resonates with what we were talking about as well.
Mm-hmm. How about one more? But we want to be sure we give time for Anne to talk about next steps and close us out here. But we have a few more minutes. Any other thoughts from the breakouts?
Well, I just want to go ahead.
Go ahead, Isley, and then Diane will pick up on you.
Go ahead, Isley.
Okay, Diane and I were in the same group, and one of the things that we kind of discussed were kind of like the focus on students, kind of like, like when we like focus on the innovation, the students should be one of the big focus, kind of like looking at how mental health has now affected the students within the pandemic, and also beforehand, the problems that existed within the, higher education learning. And also just kind of like, like we're in USG, we have the amazing benefit of being able to intersect our like practices, and kind of like, like when you have a giant sandbox full of like many varying blocks of like institutions, you could create really a unique puzzle or, building out of that kind of puzzle that you have now. And kind of like just looking at the various pieces that can be used to, I don't know, create something special. And also just kind of looking at like incentives for students, because, like when the innovation should kind of help provide intrinsic learning or motivation to actually learn, to help, further enhance lifelong learning. Diane, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Isley.
No, that was you.
Oh. Sorry, Diane, you cut out there for just a sec. You must have gotten it.
Still on mute.
Yeah.
So I've got a point I'll make as we talk about innovation, and we always think of innovation. We talk about all the next great things. I think a fair amount of time ought to be spent talking about the things that we should stop doing in order to have us think about what's working and what's not working.
If I may, I'd like to actually add on to that. I think that's a great idea. Sometimes it's a matter of getting rid of things that, I don't want to say getting rid of, because that always nervous, but really assessing what works and what doesn't. But I also think that does lead to the idea of what do our home institutions do well? Where can we borrow from things that already exist and use? This is something I've seen where we redouble efforts. There's things that are done on home institutions and we're doing them at Shady Grove. Maybe there are times that Shady Grove, the home institutions we can borrow from there and not have to redouble efforts. What does Shady Grove do really well that we don't need to go to the home institutions for, and things that can really maybe streamline our processes better and figure out where the strengths really lie.
That's terrific. Thank you, both Diane and Kevin, for those thoughts. Absolutely spot on, and probably a good place for us to close the loop here. Rick, do you have any concluding thoughts, remarks on this part of the conversation?
Well, just an observation, from having done this work for a long time, that I think we're all going to find, we're already surfacing, there's a lot of myth busting as part of this, right? We all carry around these assumptions around where are we spending our time and our money that may or may not be true. So we should know, like, what does it really cost? Secondly, that remember, cost is not just money, but most especially it's people and time. That's the real resource we want to start to shift. And then third, this idea of what's contributing, not contributing, so that that we understand ROI isn't just about the bottom line financially, it's really about impact. It's really about achieving student success and our own mission. So a good opportunity, I think, then to think about how we move forward and we create that sustainability, MJ.
Thanks, Rick. And I just want to conclude by thanking Mary and Ann for the opportunity for me to grab Rick and say, hey, we need to do this workshop, and to pull our thoughts together about what this could be and how we might facilitate this conversation at USG. I hope that some of this was helpful and sparked some ideas that you can carry forward into the strategic planning process. I have a slide that says next steps, where do we go from here? And I'm not going to bother to put it up since I just read it, so that we can all see your face and each other's faces while you give us some concluding thoughts.
Well, first big concluding thought is MJ and Rick, this was fabulous. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate the effort and the challenging thinking and the fun. I don't know about but I had a blast. This is fantastic. So thank you so much. And thank you to Chris for his mission moment. Thank you to our students who are always active participants and helping us through this process in a big way with your insights and your great energy. Thanks to our facilitators, all of our committee members. I want to recognize my co-chair in the strategic planning process, Ike Leggett. Ike, thanks for joining the workshop today. Did you want to share any thoughts, Ike?
Just to pass on my thanks as well. I found the discussion quite engaging, but it also created in my mind a thought that we need to constantly keep at forefront here, is that USG is simply different from other institutions. The flexibility that we have from an institution standpoint of view, I think greatly limits us. Shirley and I had that discussion quite vividly last year when we looked at our financial model, and we need to go back at some point to revisit that, because there are certain limitations that we have that would preclude us from taking advantage of being as creative as we want to be to ensure that we have an ROI that reflects the more constant reality for us. But those are some of the fundamental things that I think we need to constantly go back and remind ourselves that we need to reinvest, to reanalyze some of those questions on a fundamental standpoint before we can maximize the ROI in a way that we should. Thanks so much, Ike. Very good reminder and really important point for us going forward. I have so many thoughts from legacy busting, myth busting, what do innovation metrics look like as ROI or as capacity, lots of things for us to keep in mind. One of the, I think it was Leah Walk in our breakout, she said, why are we so wedded to the idea of a four-year degree based upon certain credits and based upon a certain mechanism? There are so many legacy ideas that we have that have just been traditional that, maybe Shady Grove can be a place where we lift up the hood and look at these things a little bit differently and challenge our thinking and think more holistically about higher education and our contributions. So next step, these workshops and all of the Jamboards and all of the notes and all the conversation will be fed into the strategic planning process. A lot of committee members are here today. They'll be reviewing this if they aren't able to attend. The Strategic Planning Committee is going to be working towards developing this idea of a flywheel. What is it that drives the work forward of USG? Where does innovation fit into that? And the work of the committee will provide a framework that will create committee work groups that will take deeper dives into these areas. And so all of this early thinking will be really inspirational for the work of the committee and also for the work groups as well. Hopefully we'll be challenging our thinking. I've said these work groups, workshops, they need to break some eggs, break our thinking. We don't want to be boiling eggs and painting eggs. We want to be breaking eggs with our thinking and really going into this process, thinking big picture, thinking innovation, thinking boldly, so that we can really challenge some of our thinking
we have to remember reality. We have to remember that we can't change the world overnight, but we can set a big, bold vision and take some time and really think about how we get there. So thank you all for your time today. Thank you for your insights and great ideas. And I hope to keep seeing you at the next one, which is next Friday at noon on data, being a data-driven organization. So I hope to see you all there. Thanks, everyone.